Made in New Orleans is underwritten by Art Plus Design Magazine, New Orleans Auction Galleries, and New Orleans Living Magazine.
Hi folks, I'm Steve Martin. Thank you for joining us on Made in New Orleans. Tonight I'm visiting with gallery owner Stephen Callan, but first let's take a look at the work of artist Margaret Evangeline.
There are many, it's hard to know where to start with Louisiana, but I was born here. And in Baton Rouge, because my parents both went to LSU, they thought, to them that was the most transcendent experience in the world. Is my mother came from Dodson, Louisiana, from the north, and my father came from Ville Platte, Louisiana, and at the time that was a very mixed marriage. It was like, with both families horrified. I went to school in Grand Coteau at Sacred Heart Academy, and that gives you a different feeling of Louisiana. It was a wonderful place to sort of grow up. And then after I was married, my husband was from New Orleans. I think the fogginess is one big thing. I always just adored the fogginess. And the otherness of it. That title, Spemidalium, means hope and no other. Well, it has my two favorite things that I feel like come from New Orleans directly, hope and otherness. And I always feel connected to it, always feel part of it. And in New Orleans, I know sometimes we get frustrated with the otherness of it and want to be more mainstream. I used to feel frustrated about being an artist, and then you're not really taken seriously in New York, you're not mainstream. But then once I got to New York, I found out that the mainstream is always being informed by what's outside of it and the otherness, and keeps getting unfolded into it. So the more I emphasized my otherness that came out of here, the better things were for me then. I've always had a studio by the water. When I was in New Orleans, I was on Dante, and there was a levee in between, but the water is a big part of it. And ever since I've been in New York, I've had a studio with this, it's above the Hudson River, and it's a great view. And more than, well, looking at the energy of the water it's just like one of those things, like having the brush marks every day. It's the water's teaching you something that you have a curiosity about and you don't even know. It's sort of underneath everything. And the light. And the light on the Hudson is different from the light on the Mississippi, as we all know, and it's very warm and beautiful here, almost like Venice, and around the water, and that's the pull. And on the Hudson, especially in New York, it's like very steely and somewhat cold. So that's part of the inspiration of it. The person that is a young artist, follow your heart, and that's not easy, and you just have to do a lot of internal thinking, and don't be afraid of leaving if that turns out to be what you might think you need to do. I notice here, though, that there's much more of a dialogue with contemporary artists than there was when I was here and when I left. It was really, you didn't go visit each other's studios, you didn't have talks, and I think since Katrina, I've noticed that there's much more of a dialogue between artists. There always was with musicians because it's necessary, and that's the kind of dialogue that happens in New York between visual artists, which I love, but I think it happens here now too, and there just needs to be more support for that, I think, because it's not an easy thing. It's not even easy in New York, but I see it happening here more than when I was here.
I sat down and had a conversation with Margaret about her interesting life, so let's take a look. Margaret, thank you for being with us today. It's a real pleasure to get to interview an artist of your caliber and have a chance to have you here in New Orleans for your show at Callan Contemporary.
Thank you for having me.
You told us a little bit about growing up in Louisiana and living here most of your life, and then you made a pretty adventurous trek up there and started out your career, and it's become quite a career. So can you elaborate for me on that a little bit?
When I thought I might go to New York, I had a friend who had an entirely different kind of brain than I did, and he taught accounting at Delgado, and he told me, well, just go ahead and do it. And I thought, if he thinks I can do it, I get. And I had a show in New York before I went, and then it got reviewed in Art in America, and it pretty much sold out, and I thought, piece of cake, you know.
Success.
And it was like right at the end of the 80s, I guess, when everything in New York, they thought the whole economy had collapsed and everything was so bottomed out, and coming from New Orleans, it seemed pretty like another piece of cake. It didn't seem, I had missed their big boom of the 80s.
Your first show was Elizabeth Moore, and then what was kind of a progression of galleries and maybe some museum shows, and maybe even tell us about the museums that you're in.
The museum show that I have coming up, I'm very proud of. It's at the new Eli and Edith Broad Museum in Michigan, in Lansing, and it's part of University of Michigan. And at the same time, I got a % for art, sculpture, site-specific sculpture that I just finished at the university there. And I did it with glass and steel, and it's called Heart Like Glass, Memory Like Steel. And the president, even though that's like big gun country, I mean, you know, so maybe, and that's probably why they called on me, and they called and invited me to do this piece. And then when they took it to the president, he was saying, oh, no, gun, which I can understand, it's college. So he didn't want something with a gunshot, and they wanted, that was why they asked me, so I did it with archery. And he decided that was okay. And
well, this is a good point, probably, to talk a little bit about your sculpture that you do, where you shoot the surfaces. Did that come from being a Louisiana girl?
Yeah, of course. My grandfather had a farm in Ville Platte, and I don't know if they always took the girls out to do this, but at the time, you know, I was probably his only grandchild, and my brother came along. But anyway, so he taught me everything, riding a horse when that was time. He taught me how to drive a car, because, you know, there were still horse and buggies in Ville Platte at that time. So it was a good place to learn how to drive on the highway and pass the thing. So, but the gun thing, it was like, you know, the family, you pass down these guns and the rituals, and you have lots of BBs in your squirrel gumbo, and so that was all part of it. And then I forgot about it, you know. It moved on, I guess, once I learned how to drive. And then in '99, when I had a residency at Art OMI which is right outside of Hudson, New York, I had been painting on aluminum and steel because it made this beautiful kind of light. And I thought, well, maybe I can make a hole in it, because actually emptiness is also a big part of my work. So I borrowed, they had a gun culture, I borrowed a gun and I made just one with a hole in it. And that was satisfying, and I didn't get to go anywhere with it because I can't do that in my studio.
I was going to say, where do you shoot a gun in New York?
Right. I think of them as environmental pieces because they're mirror polished, and mostly I shoot in Albuquerque. They take the sky.
And that's part of your video that you have currently on your website that shows you shooting into a mirrored surface, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that was at Art OMI, actually, when they invited me to do something for the Sculpture Park, a site-specific piece. And it was fun because it was like very local, and the curators thought that my work would be kind of ironic there because, you know, all of the billboards the stop signs are all shot up around.
Right. It's a rite of passage, right?
Right, exactly. And so the neighboring farm loaned me the gun, and actually when it jammed, one of the teenage interns ran home and got his own that was just like it, and we finished the piece. And everybody was asking, do you ever have pictures of you actually shooting? So I had this little 8mm camera, and we put it on a flower pot, and we put it up there so that I thought, well, it'd be interesting if it's mirror polished, you can see me and the gun at the same time. Like the Jackson Pollock film, when Hans Nemeth is under the glass and but then I thought, how you do that without shooting the photographer? So we did this and at the beginning of the video, there's the assistant's voice, very male, saying, aim at the camera, because I could see the reflection of the camera. And so when I aimed at the camera, then it looked like I'm shooting into myself. Right. So that was the video, and I made that right outside of Hudson in the woods.
Well, you talked a little bit about destruction of the surface and without having to touch it, and that's where this came from. And how does that go through your other media that you work in, your paintings, for example?
I have a painting called Decreation, and it's like, that's kind of the process. And there was a mystic in the 12th century when there were some female mystics, and her name is Margaret Evangeline, and some of the titles come from her writings, like Joy Inhabits Marguerite, but that was one of her terms, is decreation. And what she talks about is that it's impossible to know anything. She was a very educated woman, but she writes about it's impossible to know anything except through the heart, and it's a different kind of process, and she writes a lot about that. So I've always, before I knew that, before I studied her, before I knew any of that, I've always just been interested in things that are somewhat subversive about the givens, so that you have to look at it again, or that maybe it just comes from that Louisiana good old boy thing that I have a little bit of.
Right. You have achieved quite a bit of fame in New York, and the museums there collect you. You're in all the big collections. Your work is very conceptual in a way. It's visually immediate because you can walk in and see the surfaces and see what you're doing. But maybe for a novice, just regular folks, someone that may look at art today and think, okay, where does this come from? What are they trying to say? Where is it going? Why is this art? Can you maybe describe a little bit of what your work does that might reach them if they look at it in a certain way?
Well, I think if it looks like art, it's not art. So that's where the conceptual part comes for me, is that to try to get underneath the expectations and then hopefully see it. And I think if people let themselves experience it and it evolves. This is how it does for me when I'm looking at other people's work. It evolves slowly over time and understanding from looking at a lot of different things. So I just think, unfortunately, you have to go through the pain of not knowing, and that's I guess what the art is about, is that it's very painful to proceed this way and not know what you're going to come up with, and then you have to learn how to put that aside and then do it. And I read, I think it's Jerry Saltz wrote recently about, he noticed that people don't even do that anymore because he watches collectors come with their art advisor and they stand in front of the painting, and he says they don't even have to ask a question. They don't have to go through the pain of wondering, that they have somebody in tow who explains to them what it's about. But I think a big part of all of it is to let yourself not know when you're looking at it.
So it engages the viewer to become part of the process.
Exactly, yeah, it has to be that,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. How do you see New Orleans now informing New York art scene, or maybe the world?
Well, I think we were just talking about everybody from New York ends up coming here and they fall in love with New Orleans and they support New Orleans artists, and they're in a good mood when they get here. They're not necessarily in a good mood in New York, and I think that
It's because we're so friendly.
It's just this otherness that we were talking about too, that you can't really get around, and probably even with we just notice all the boom, it's probably not going to destroy that otherness, that it's life, that kind of thing. They're people are very interested in from everywhere, and so that's I know more and more New Yorkers, like I was saying, I did a site-specific piece here that I heard from more people in New York who saw that piece and told me, oh, that was beautiful. And I thought, like, you don't know how long I have tried to get this person to look at my work in New York, and he goes to New Orleans and he
That's
sees
good
it.
news for us.
Yeah, right. It's great. Oh, it's really great.
Well, I so appreciate you coming in and talking with us today. It's been a real treat, and I wish you great success with your show here. I hope that everybody can get out and take a look at it. Why don't you tell us where it's at, where you're showing here, and what the title of the show is?
It's at Callan Contemporary on Julia Street, and the title of the show is We Thought We Were Drowning, But It Was Only Love.
Margaret, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
You're watching WLAE, New Orleans Public Television. Find us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter.
And we're back, and we're very fortunate tonight to have Steve Callan, a longtime member of the New Orleans art community, join us. Steve, thanks for coming in.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
It's good to see you, man.
Thank you.
People need to know who you are, and if they don't already, you've been here for such a long time. Can you tell us a little bit about how your career in art started, how you became a gallery owner?
Well, I started my career in New Orleans in 1984. I went to work as director of Kurt Schoen Galleries, which are two galleries in the French Quarter on Royal and St. Louis Street. Kurt Schoen Gallery specialized in 19th and early 20th century European paintings.
And that's a whole different
different ball game.
Yeah.
Right. I was there as director for almost 15 years. And after that, I opened my own galleries on Magazine Street and Charter Street in the French Quarter. My galleries specialize in a bit of a different time period. I specialize in French paintings, particularly the Barbizon School, French post-impressionist paintings, and impressionist paintings. I have a few living artists that I represent, like Tony Green, who's a local painter who lives in Venice and also here in New Orleans, and great musician.
Renaissance man.
One of those multi-talented guys.
Right.
But that's what I do now. The galleries were combined into one gallery at 240 Charter Street. The name of the firm there is Callan Fine Art.
Okay, so from a long-time career in art of that style,
yes,
you've made quite a jump in the new venture of Callan Contemporary.
That's true. I suppose the connection is I've always loved contemporary art. That goes back to my childhood days with my family. My mother loved contemporary art. She was a patron of a number of contemporary artists. So growing up as a child, I was exposed to that. In my later years, I began to collect contemporary art myself and was always keenly interested in it and attracted to it. So it is not such a leap. Even though I was dealing in 19th century paintings, I was collecting contemporary art.
It's not this simple, but art is art, and it's basically what you like as a...
It's true. It's true. I mean, I like both time periods, but I have a real affection and attraction to contemporary.
So it's not like having to wear one hat, take it off, and go to the other.
No, not really.
Kind of still dealing in the same realm.
Exactly.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about the artists that you represent at Callan Contemporary. We've been very fortunate to have several of them on the show last year, such as Rain Betzel and George Dunbar. We just had the segment on Margaret Evangeline tonight. David is coming up. Tell us more about what you do there.
Callan Contemporary specializes in paintings, sculpture, and mixed media. Our artists, we represent local artists, as you mentioned. We're very, very honored to be representing George Dunbar. Our current show now is for Margaret Evangeline, who will be on your show. Other local artists we represent are Rain Betzel, Adrian Dekbar, David Borgerding, Teresa Cole. So we have a wonderful group of local artists that we represent. We also represent national artists and internationally renowned artists. So our group of artists are varied. We are looking forward with our local artists to take them out on a more international level.
Right.
And by doing that is going to art fairs around the United States.
So is there any kind of theme that you work with your gallery as far as the artists that you select?
I think if there is a theme, it basically boils down to our personal attraction to the work and the craftsmanship that the artists have. Each one of the artists we represent has a distinctive style that is all their own, and that's one of the things that my wife and I really are most attracted to as artists with singular talents that really stand out to us as being something quite special and unique.
Well, you have a wonderful showplace, too. It's one of the premier galleries in the city. It's a beautiful space.
It is a beautiful space. My wife opened the Gallery Bienvenue right after Hurricane Katrina, and the space was designed by a nationally renowned architect, Lee Ledbetter. It is a great space to display artwork. The artists love it. It gives the paintings or sculpture room to breathe.
Right. Tell us a little bit, because you mentioned Borislava, you work with your wife. Some people find that difficult, but it works for you guys because y'all have a love for art. And tell us a little bit about Borislava and her role there at Callan Contemporary. And she's a pretty important driving force to it.
Absolutely. Borislava has a great eye for art. She opened the gallery at that time called Gallery Bienvenue, as I mentioned, right after Hurricane Katrina. We had the opportunity 2 years ago to buy the gallery, and we are endeavoring to put our own particular stamp on it. Borislava has a great skill with selecting artwork and working with her artists. The artists really trust her sense of taste and her input into their careers.
Right. Well, you guys are also ambassadors for New Orleans and New Orleans arts scene, because you do a lot of participation in art fairs and art shows. Can you give us a little bit of that experience?
Well, today the art fairs are almost a necessity for dealers. It didn't used to be that way. We used to wait for people to come to the galleries, and of course New Orleans is a wonderful place for people to visit, so most of the business that galleries saw were people walking in the door. But with the advent of the international art fairs, it necessitates a gallery going out and introducing their artists to a wider audience, particularly our local artists. We are blessed with having a great collection, a great group of local artists that we represent, and we really want the rest of the country to know about them. New Orleans is a great art city for its size,
right.
But one really needs to go beyond the boundaries of the city at this point.
Well, speaking of that, and something that you mentioned, the internet, that's another component of your attack, basically.
Yeah, the internet has brought everybody right to your door, and I think this is the new age where we are meeting people on the internet that have never been to our gallery before. There are different services and features that the internet brings to a business that I never saw when I was first in business. So that is a component that I think every gallery should and is taking advantage of.
Right. I saw an article recently that brought up a 1962 Playboy article on artists that you should buy at that time, and it listed like Rauschenberg and different people, and had the prices, and I think it was $100,000, which was a lot of money in 1962.
It was.
But invested in a portfolio of those artists that they thought were contemporary and going to be somebody, versus buying somebody like a Picasso who was already established. And taking a look at that portfolio today, just the Rauschenberg was worth $45 million, and the Jackson Pollock,
nice return.
Yeah, the Jackson Pollock was worth $65 million. So if you can expand on art as an investment and the type of collector that you're trying to put your artist in front of.
You know, when one starts talking about investment, it's a very tricky area. I think, you know, first and foremost, the only reason to buy a piece of artwork is because you love it. The art world does present some fairly unique opportunities. We're seeing extraordinary prices over the last 2 weeks paid for paintings at auction, hundreds of millions of dollars for one, which is completely mind-boggling. But that's where we are in the world today. Art, for a lot of people with money, art is considered an investment, and they look at their portfolios that way. For most of our clients, they're buying for the sheer love of the artist and love of the painting.
Right. How can people find you? What's your address at Callan Contemporary?
Well, we're on Julia Street, which is, Julia Street has really become a destination in the city for contemporary art. Our address is 518 Julia Street.
And you have a website address?
We have a website, which is www.callancontemporary.com.
Well, I know people will be very pleased if they go down and take a look at what you have, and I really want to thank you for coming in tonight and sharing all this with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Hope to see you again soon.
Okay.
We'll be right back with some more Made in New Orleans.
Hi, we're Ola High, and you're watching WLAE TV.
It looks like we're out of time. I'm Steve Martin. Thanks for watching, and be sure to join us next time for more Made in New Orleans.
Made in New Orleans is underwritten by Art Plus Design Magazine, New Orleans Auction Galleries, and New Orleans Living Magazine.